Throughout World War II, there were many women who turned to work inside of the concentration camps to become beastly guards who would willingly execute, torture and slaughter prisoners who were being held in terrible conditions. Some of these women became guards purely for the money, and they were transformed to become monsters during the training process that the SS put them through. Female overseers such as Maria Mandel schooled these young women on how to become brutes, and even Irma Grazer, the woman who would later be known as the hyena of Auschwitz, was reprimanded for initially showing too much kindness to the prisoners. But at the end of World War II, there were a number of women who were brought to trial, and they were accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Inside of the camp of Stutthof, which was found in Gdansk, were a collection of young women guards, and these were later tried for their horrific actions within the site. These women included a 24-year-old who seemed in the courtroom more bothered about her hair and the fact she took great joy in flirting with the guards. She showed absolutely no remorse for her crimes, and the beautiful Spectre, as she was nicknamed, was condemned to death for her work during the Second World War. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was brought in front of a huge crowd for her execution, and on a massive gallows which had been constructed on a hill close to the camp where she worked, she was executed first out of the Stutthof guards. The executioner, who was actually a former prisoner of the camp, wrapped the noose around her neck before she was left on the gallows. But what specifically did Jenny Wanda Barkmann do that was so horrific that she needed to be executed publicly at the end of the war? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was born on the 30th of May 1922 inside the German city of Hamburg. She was very young when the Nazis rose to prominence, and was younger than a teenager when Hitler seized control of the nation. As Hitler came into power, there were huge expectations imposed upon young people within Germany and the nation. Youth groups were set up for boys and girls, and membership eventually became compulsory for them, and young women joined the BDM, the League of German Girls or Maidens. This was the girls' wing of the Hitler Youth, and it became the only legal female youth organisation within Nazi Germany. Teenagers aged between 14 to 18 became members of the League proper, but even younger ones, such as Barkmann, were brought into the Young Girls League. In this they were indoctrinated heavily, and there were 4.5 million members at its height. Girls in the group were taught how to cook and how to raise children and run a household. This is what the Nazis expected for young women. They wanted them to have as many children as possible for the Nazi Reich, so that the sons would become members of the Hitler Youth and then soldiers for the army, and daughters would repeat the cycle, leading to a population boom. Girls also took part during the Second World War in the National Labour Service, where they completed work for the society. Jenny Wanda Barkmann, without doubt, would have been a member of the League of German Girls, and she would have been indoctrinated into the Nazi politics and policies. The former leader of the group claimed about the intentions of the League of German Maidens that our people need a generation of girls which is healthy in body and mind, sure and decisive, proudly and confidently going forward, one which assumes its place in everyday life with poise and discernment, one free of sentimental and rapturous emotions, and which, for precisely this reason, in sharply defined femininity, would be the comrade of man, because she does not regard him as some sort of idol, but rather as a companion. Such girls will then, by necessity, carry the values of National Socialism into the next generation as a mental bulwark of our people. Many of the young girls who thrived within the League of German Maidens eventually went on to devote more of their time and life to the Nazi cause, and some eventually joined the SS retinue. This was a collection of women who signed up to do jobs for the SS whilst men were away fighting. The group attracted women from all different walks of life, and eventually the requirement was for women to become concentration camp guards. The lure of better pay and promotion within the SS and an organisation led to many women leaving their jobs as hairdressers, teachers or shop assistants, and they were sent to different concentration camps to then complete the period of compulsory training to become an Aufseherin or a female overseer. Jenny Wanda Barkmann had been raised by her father, who was a dock worker, and the family did not always have so much money, but she had huge dreams. She wanted to become an actress or a model, and after attending school, she became a fashion model and was known for her beauty and her looks. However, whilst the war was ongoing, despite her links to Nazi groups, she continued to attend photo shoots for German fashion magazines, and she featured heavily in many different advertisements. But something changed in her mind, and it may have been the indoctrination she faced as a younger woman within the Nazi youth groups. In 1944, Jenny Wanda Barkmann volunteered with the SS to become a female guard, and she was then sent to the Stutthof Concentration Camp inside the city of Gdansk to conduct her training period. Stutthof was the first German concentration camp that was established outside German borders during World War II, and it opened on the 2nd of September 1939, just a single day after the Nazi invasion of Poland began. It would also become the final concentration camp that was liberated on the 9th of May 1945. There were around 110,000 prisoners who were sent to the camp during the time that it was in operation, and it changed significantly during the war and also expanded on a colossal extent. In January 1942, it became a regular concentration camp, and there were different parts of the camp. There was the old camp surrounded by a tall barbed wire fence holding 8 barracks and also rooms for the SS guards, but then the new camp was created surrounded by an electrified barbed wire fence, and this had 30 barracks and also a gas chamber and crematoria which were built in 1943 to carry out mass exterminations of the prisoner population. The camp was staffed by German SS guards, and the first female guards arrived at the camp in 1942, and around 295 women worked there. The conditions of Stutthof were extremely tough and brutal, and dozens of thousands of people died from starvation, disease, and at the hands of the guards. Lots died from the typhus epidemics that swept throughout the camp, and if the prisoners were not fit enough to work and conduct hard labour, then they would be sent to the camp's small gas chamber, where they were killed. Executions continued throughout Stutthof's time in operation. For example, in 1944, 4,000 prisoners died within the gas chamber of the camp, including many women and children, lots of these being selected to be slaughtered by the women guard force. The prisoners were forced to do work incredibly hard, and many German companies utilised the slave labour workforce, and the inmates were ordered to do work that benefited the German war effort, including making armaments and parts for Luftwaffe aircraft. Because of all the terror, roughly 65,000 people died within the fences of Stutthof. As the war went on, there was a need for many female guards to work at Stutthof, and a number of male guards were sent to the front lines to go and fight, especially as the German war effort was dwindling. Inside the local area of Gdansk, advertisements were sent out in the region, and the call was answered by local women. Jenny Wanda Barkmann at Stutthof passed her interviews, and she underwent the training period, coming through this relatively easily. She may have been attracted to the work for the money that she received in pay, and also for the advancement opportunity. Barkmann, while she worked at Stutthof, quickly got stuck into the brutality and barbarism of the guard staff at the site. She was known for being immensely cruel and also sadistic. She was seen working inside the female camp of Stutthof, and she was also witnessed a number of times beating women prisoners with her own hands, and then battering them so badly that they almost died. She tortured the inmates in many different ways, and some of the guards who had worked at the camp for much longer were even shocked by the actions of a woman who became known as Mad Jenny because of her crimes. The other nickname that she had was the Beautiful Spectre. One former prisoner of Stutthof later claimed about the conditions of the camp that, "We were first in a barrack together. Most of the barracks were a wooden stable. You've seen that. 3 people to a bunk. In the centre there were 4 bunks. The horse blankets, the grey blankets that we called horse blankets, were so rough. In any case you got 1 to a bunk. You do me a favour and tell me how you share that. 3 people to a bunk." Nobody knew how to share it. The number of inmates decreased. People died like flies. We were again faced with this lack of water, lack of lavatories. There were latrines right over in the fields. They were just holes in the ground. You couldn't see in the dark. You were afraid to fall into them. It was slippery, especially when the winter came, and it all froze over. You got a mug of coffee. I always say this black water that was called coffee, and after that you save some to wash yourself. You have very good intentions at first. You really think you are going to rinse your mouth. Dental hygiene is very important. It wasn't then because you actually need the fluid in your body. So cleanliness goes to hell. Food you haven't got that would sustain you. After the first couple of days, you were lined up to go and work, or by that time, some looked worse again, and so the number got smaller. One of the most barbaric actions that Jenny Wanda Barkmann got involved in was the selections. Stutthof, to begin with, did not have a gas chamber at the camp. Instead, those who were chosen to be exterminated were sent to other sites to be slaughtered. When the gas chamber was constructed, a number of guards were involved in selecting prisoners to be killed within the chamber. Those who were too weak to work or who had slight injuries were quickly marched into the gas chamber, but Jenny Wanda Barkmann was one of those guards who did take part in the selections, and she chose hundreds of women and children to be taken into the gas chamber to be killed. This would later come back to haunt her, and she drove some of the prisoners in with her own hands. She was also responsible for battering women with her whip and other weapons. But like so many of the other former concentration camp guards, as the war turned against the Germans, and during the evacuation processes of the camp, Jenny Wanda Barkmann made a run for it, and she knew that if captured, she would be brought to a trial at the end of the war. She was in the local area of Gdansk, incredibly hunted, and many were searching for her as Stutthof was being evacuated. Jenny Barkmann hid out, and she remained in the local area until May 1945. She was not the most intelligent with her escape attempt, and whilst trying to board a train to leave Gdansk, presumably to head back to Hamburg, her hometown, she was arrested and was seized. Images of her had been distributed in the local area, and descriptions of her had been sent all over Europe. Her image, which was captured at the camp, was even circulated. Someone had helped her hiding, and during the interrogations, Barkmann shockingly claimed that she had always treated the prisoners of the camp well, and she said that she had never treated anyone poorly, displayed any violence, or killed a prisoner. She also shockingly said that she had helped some prisoners who were starving heavily, portraying herself as some form of saviour for the helpless. But the interrogators knew that she was lying, but one of her prison guards actually briefly fell in love with her, and he would let her out of the cell for short periods of time. But after the guard saw the state of some of the prisoners who Jenny Wanda Barkmann had mistreated, his perception of her, the beautiful woman in his custody, then became a monster in his eyes. Jenny Wanda Barkmann was brought to the Stutthof trials, and this legal proceeding brought a number of former guards of the camp in front of a courtroom to answer for their actions. Documents and witness testimony was gathered against her, and the courtroom was told all about her crimes. Jenny's lawyer saw a way of getting her off the death penalty, and he tried to claim that Mad Jenny was in fact insane and unable to stand trial, not being fit to do so. But the courtroom did not buy this, and she came across incredibly cold. When images were shown of the state of Stutthof camp, Jenny laughed, and she spent more of her time flirting with male guards of the courtroom and playing with her hair than she did showing any form of remorse at all. She laughed when witnesses testified, and it didn't take long for the judges to condemn her to death. She, along with a number of other women, were sentenced to death, and the executions would be conducted swiftly. The final words that Jenny Barkmann uttered in front of the judges were, "Life is really a great pleasure, and pleasure, as a rule, does not last long." On the 4th of July 1946, the execution place was set for the condemned guards of the Stutthof Concentration Camp. High on Biskupia Gorka Hill in the city of Gdansk, a massive crowd of thousands of people had gathered. A huge set of gallows had been created on the hillside, and there were 5 gallows in total, which stood high above the crowd. They were made so big that everyone could see, and it was here where the former guards of Stutthof would be executed. The female guards were gathered together, and the first who was executed was Jenny Barkmann, being just 24 years old. She was led out in front of the huge crowd and was taken towards a truck, which had been backed up under the gallows. Stood on the back of the truck were a number of officials and an executioner, who was actually a former prisoner of Stutthof. For some of the executions, the executioners actually wore their striped pyjama uniforms of the concentration camp. An official read out loudly the death sentence, and he outlined the crimes of Jenny Barkmann, and the crowd gasped in horror. She was sat on a stool whilst this was happening, and then she was ordered to stand, and the executioner threw the noose over the gallows structure, and then held the loop in their hand. Barkmann had the noose then thrown over her head, and this was tightened around her neck. There was no black hood or cap placed over her head, and the executioner, whilst Barkmann was stood on the stool, banged on the roof of the truck that they were stood on. This gave the driver the signal that it was time to drive off. Slowly the truck moved forward, and as this happened, Barkmann was left hanging on the gallows. She was struggling, kicking and gasping for air, as it was choked out of her, and after some time her body then went limp, and she twitched a few times before she went stiff. She was the first executed that day. Jenny Barkmann was just 24 years old when she was executed, meaning that she was around 22 years old when she committed horrific crimes inside of Stutthof Concentration Camp. She was one of many female guards who demonstrated brutality and who sent prisoners willingly to their deaths inside the small gas chamber within the site. Barkmann was known as the beautiful spectre, and many prisoners could not understand how a woman who was so beautiful as she was and as young as her could become a murderer and a slaughterer. She was for her crimes executed in front of a huge crowd, and she is remembered alongside women such as Irma Grazer for her brutal actions during World War II. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.